Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moni wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Stefanie Lucianovic. She is here to celebrate Hello Star. Hello, Stefanie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am really great. I'm really excited to find out about Hello Star.
Well, I'm excited to tell you anything you want to know about it.
Well, why don't we start with, I read in the notes that Hello Star is a book about science and empathy. I don't always equate those two together. Can you let us know how that happens?
Sure. So essentially, a girl's empathy for a dying star puts her on an ambitious path of discovery and dedication, with the dimming light acting as her guide along the way. Now that's the elevator pitch of the story. Essentially, the girl finds out that a star is going supernova. So it's dying. It's losing its life. It's at the end of its lifespan. She asks her mother about it, who explains a little bit about supernovas, or at least what that means to a star, and the girl wants to learn more. So she asks her teacher. She ends up, as she grows up, studying stars and space and becoming an astronaut, all because she wants to learn more about the star and get closer to the star as it dies. Now, it is not scientifically possible for her to be where she is at the end of the book. That's more of a metaphor. However, this story is based on a real supernova event that happened in 1987. It's called Supernova 1987. And that star, when it went supernova, was seen in the southern hemisphere by the naked eye. You didn't even need a telescope. You could see a bright light, and it was identified as being a supernova. And to this day, that event is still generating light, stellar clouds. There's still star life out there after the event of the supernova. They're still seeing this continue through telescopes.
Wow, that's incredible. And, the minute you started talking about this little girl having empathy for a star that was going supernova, I was there with her, because I started imagining, we don't know if there's life on other planets, but we do know that there's planets revolving around most stars. And I'm thinking, wow, a star goes out. Not only does a star go out, but the light and the energy for all of those worlds around it goes out. And, for beings that might be living out there.
The origin of this story is actually from my oldest son, who's now a 7th grader. He was in 1st grade, though, when he was very interested in space and, could name all the planets and all the planets' moons. And he came to me one night and said, "Did you know that stars die? Isn't that sad?" I had never thought of it that way at all, because I'm a kind of, an adult, a jaded adult. We don't think about things the way kids do in that sense. And I thought, wow, it is sad. And it made me think of the empathy or love we have for various inanimate objects in our life, things that aren't technically alive. I mean, I would say that stars are alive and, planetary forces are alive. But, whether it's stuffed animals or even your car, or like you have these attachments, this empathy. And I thought, well, what would a child do with that empathy? How would they sort of exert that need to take care of something that they are sad for or worried about, being alone, lonely, and dying out there in space? And that's when I sat down and wrote the story that night, it was all generated from that moment of my first grader being sad about a star.
Isn't it amazing how our kids can open our eyes to things that we should be seeing, but we just aren't able to?
I mean, it truly is, and I have experienced this for many years now. I have two sons, and their interests drive our interest at times. I know so much more about the local train system, Caltrain here, than I ever would have imagined because, your kid gets obsessed with something and you look up more information to give them that information to feed that interest. And I mean, one thing I think about picture books, I truly do believe this, is that I think picture books specifically, but children's books in general, keep us connected to that child self. I realized this when rereading Beverly Cleary's books to my sons, and I was thinking she had such insight into the child's mind. I didn't realize that when I was reading them. I loved the books. Mm-hmm. I didn't analyze why. But books that can give you that insight into a child's mind or connect you back to the child you either were or the child you have is so important. And we do lose that as we get older. I think teachers, anyone who works with kids, parents can stay connected, but it's my recommendation that all adults should be reading picture books. I think they should be reading middle grade, even if they don't have children. I send my favorite picture books to adults who don't have children as gifts, either because I consider them art objects within, and the story as being part of the art, but I just find them so amazing and beautiful. And I don't think enough adults realize the empathy we can find, the connection we can make, the reconnection within children's books. I think we need to be reading a lot more of them.
Yeah. I heard John Grisham once kind of poo-poo children's authors. You get up in front of a group of people and said, I read 36 books this weekend. They're only 14 pages, and, who writes these things? But a children's picture book, a story, and sometimes a very profound story, has to be told with 600 words.
Yeah.
And those words have to be perfect. It's, a novel is 30,000, 50,000 words and however many pages. But those picture books, the story, the point of the story has to be delivered in a very concise, beautiful, powerful way.
Exactly. And I actually, when I started writing picture books, I saw it as writing with a scalpel. You're constantly cutting away. And I also used to have a tweet pinned on Twitter that said, novelists count how many words they write in a day. Picture book writers count how many they leave out. Because that's exactly what it is. We have to keep it for industry standards, but also because of a child's attention span. Mm-hmm. And I think their brevity is another reason why I love recommending them to adults. Back when I was pregnant with my second child and I had my first, and I was tired all the time, and I felt like I didn't have enough time to do anything, much less read a long book. Sitting with a picture book was had this meditative effect on me as an adult. I wasn't even necessarily reading it to my child at the time. It was a moment I could take, and I could read a whole book and feel nourished by reading it. And it didn't have to be 60,000 words. I mean, we have to keep a child's attention. Adults, we worry less about that when we write adult books.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my beautiful wife, who's been a teacher for 34 years for kindergarten, first and second graders, kids with special needs and extremely short attention spans, when we get dozens of books here at the studio every week, and she'll just go through them, and she can just tell right from the number of words on a page that, nope, my kids won't even, there's no way my kids will sit through this.
It's true. And I will say that there's also this push to have slightly longer picture books because more and more teachers are pushing them into high school situations. Like I've read articles of high school teachers, reintroducing picture books to teenagers and having them either because it's just great to read them or because you can study story that way. You can study the construct, the arc, without it being, an extremely long thing that you're reading. You can really sort of get to the bones of it and see, how does this story work? How does it rise and fall? What kind of a story is it? What's the narrative structure? All these different things can be studied using multiple picture books.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me as you were talking about Hello Star and this empathy this little girl has for the star, and that empathy driving her curiosity and her exploration of STEM. We've talked a lot here on the podcast about efforts to get girls into the STEM fields. And as we've been talking to these different authors and I've been doing some of my own research, one of the things I've heard is that a theory that's been put forth is the reason there aren't a lot of girls in STEM is that girls have this empathy. Girls like relation typically. Not every girl would, but typically girls like relationships. They like people. They have this empathy where guys like things. They like to build things. Did that thought cross your mind as you're writing this? Is maybe we can help girls understand just how much they can help the world through the STEM fields?
Not the empathy part of it, because of my son being empathetic towards the stars, why I wrote it. And in fact, both my kids are very sensitive, empathetic boys. And we had preschool teachers telling us when my oldest was in preschool, this is the most empathetic child we've ever met. And we've continued to try and foster that. However, when I first wrote it, the first draft was a little boy because it was my son. But as a woman, as someone who is the daughter of a scientist, I know full well that there's not enough women and girls in the sciences. And so I decided, well, this isn't going, we have enough boys and rocket ships and those kinds of things. We need more girls and trains and girls and trucks and girls and space. And so I did change that for the purpose of these books girls need to see themselves in these books. Mm-hmm. And luckily we are getting a lot more of those these days. I mean, Hello Star is one of many that is making that attempt to ensure that girls see themselves, whether it's the empathy side, how science is, any science story is storytelling, the story of a scientific story of a star, not my story, but science is all about the story of the things you're studying. I think if more kids realize that, or it was taught that way, there's more interest. You like a story sticks with you. I have a book that I'm working on right now that is similar in the sense of it's a geology based idea, but there's empathy involved in telling the story of the interest in this particular geological object. Yeah. So I do think that connection to science on an empathy level is important, because that's how we're going to combat climate change. Mm-hmm. We have to have empathy for our trees and our plants and our air, and that's all science. That's all STEM. And, the kids that have that empathy are going to save us. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting you talking about teaching science through story and helping kids understand that science is the story of these different things. I had this really unique experience of visiting a cave system in Virginia, and I was the only one who showed up for the tour, and I had a geologist taking me on the tour, and so he was going through the canned trip, with the dopey jokes about, oh, there's the highlight of the trip, look up there, that way. And I just said to him, goes, look, sir, stop with the script. Just tell me what you find interesting about this cave. And I had the most amazing experience. This man shared his passion for this cave, and he was telling me the story of the cave, and talk about coming alive. It was just, I was so lucky. I'll never forget the day. I forget a lot about the facts that he told me and the different minerals, but I remember just the passion and understanding that this was more than just a hole in the ground. It was in some ways, it was a living thing. It was real to this person.
I love that because I do think that the energy that anybody brings to teaching like that, when they get to truly show what drives them, what makes them passionate, is so important to their students. My husband's a math professor, and I've had the opportunity to both watch him teach, but also because of COVID, I hear him teaching down the hall. And he is so energetic for multiple hours on end, whether it's through his lectures or it's in his office hours. And I marvel at how he is genuinely excited. And I've seen him, in front of a lecture, in a lecture hall, be incredibly animated. He doesn't just sit and drone at a chalkboard. He's pacing, he's using his arms, he's cracking jokes. He's very on. And we can tell from the students' responses when he gets his, at the end of the year, when they talk about what they liked about the course, they really respond to it. I mean, it shows how much he loves math and how much he really wants them to love it too, the way he loves it as an art form.
Yeah. Now, I wonder, you said, you shared with us that you've been able to hear him teach because of COVID. I've been able to hear my beautiful wife teaching. I wonder if your husband had the same experience. One day I was here in the studio and I heard my wife say to her students, I'm sorry, I don't know what that smell is. I'm not at home with you right now.
Well, no, I mean, his students are college students, so
you'd hope.
He hasn't. No, I have not heard that at all. But that's really funny. I mean, having my own kids be in distance learning and being down the hall and hearing them interact with their teachers, like we had a rat situation one day, and I overheard my youngest explaining to his teacher, he's now in third grade, but this was last year. No, that's okay. They're just screaming about the rat. It was just, without context, I don't know what that teacher thought, but it was just like, oh no, it's just crazy here,
One of the things, Stefanie, that you said is that you find picture books to be a work of art. And Hello Star certainly can be considered a work of art. You worked with an amazing illustrator.
Yes. So you may know this having talked to so many authors. We don't always get to have our choice of illustrators or have input, but I think more and more now, editors do come to an author and say, here's who we were thinking of. What's your reaction, to who, because, they're the ones who buy the book. They get to imagine it the way they want to imagine it. It's theirs now. Well, so I had been following Vashti's work on Twitter before this book sold. And as I was writing it and when it was on submission, I kept seeing her tweets and I think her Instagram too, that was showing how she showed light and darkness. And I was so completely blown away that her art just was in my head. So when I had the opportunity to recommend who I could see for this book, she was my number one choice. And I didn't know if she would be available because she was super busy at the time. And, I very luckily got a call from my editor a couple of months later who was like, I think you're going to sit down. Yeah, she wants to do the book. And I was just like, I was in tears and, so excited. And then when the art started coming in and I started to see glimpses of it, again, I was in tears. Like, I mean, there's one particular spread in the book that I saw later in the sort of the art journey, and I was just completely overwhelmed with it. I can't even really, it's not even the last image, the one that you would expect. It's something in the middle that I still get choked up about because of how awesome it is. So I do consider myself really fortunate that the illustrator that I really wanted to work with on this book was able to do it and willing to do it and, has produced this amazing piece of art that I knew was always going to be what resulted in it. But I still can't quite wrap my head around the fact that that's what happens.
Yeah. And of course, the Vashti that we're speaking about is Vashti Harrison.
Yes.
And she is the illustrator of so many amazing, beautiful books. And that was one of the things that blew me away when I first started doing the podcast, is learning that, if your book is bought by a traditional publishing house, you probably will have no idea who the illustrator is going to be.
Right. You have to go into it, and we're all told this, you have to let go of it. It's no longer my book. It's no longer your book. When a publishing house buys it and there's an illustrator, it's our book. It's the illustrator brings their own story to the original text, and it becomes this collaboration. It's not always a working side-by-side collaboration. That can happen for sure, but usually it's a very separate collaboration, and it becomes a single piece that you own together. It's, I've heard picture book authors starting out saying, I don't know if I could handle it if I didn't like the illustrator for my book and I didn't like their art. And it's like, well, but it's not your book anymore. That's what you have to get your head around. It becomes this joint piece, and that's wonderful. I mean, illustrators will bring stuff to the text that you don't expect. Mm-hmm. It happened with my first book, The End of Something Wonderful, that stuff that I had never envisioned in that book, but were perfect, were brought into that. And the same has happened with Hello Star. And it's always kind of an exciting surprise to see that happen, because you don't write art notes. You're not supposed to have art notes to say, like, and she'll be wearing a pink shirt here, and this is how the house looks. It's nope, that's the illustrator. The illustrator gets to tell that part of the story. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing. Yeah.
And that's another thing that makes picture books such a beautiful experience for both kids and adults, is that, we joke here about kids wanting their parents to read a book over and over and over and over again. And if you're just picking up the book and just reading the words, then it becomes over and over and over again. But the beauty of a picture book is that you can sit down and read that book hundreds, if not 1,000 times, and have a different experience every single time. If you're creative and, just explore the pictures a little bit more and, talk about the rhythm of the words and sharing in the reading, it's beautiful. And it's those experiences that I remembered having with my kids a couple of decades ago, when they were on my lap and we were reading a book for the 500th time, but reading it in a different way. And that's one of the reasons we started the podcast, because it's just such a beautiful, beautiful bonding moment between parent and child.
It's true. And it's funny, when I was pregnant with my second and I had my first, and we were doing a lot of reading together, what we were reading were a lot of the books from my own childhood. Mm-hmm. The old standbys, whether it was Corduroy or The Little House or Where the Wild Things Are. And they're all wonderful books, but there came a point with some books that I really was worn out. I was tired of reading them. I was generally just tired because mm-hmm. I was pregnant and I had a 3-year-old. And I thought, this is before I started writing picture books. I was a writer, but I wasn't writing for children. And I had this moment of, I shouldn't say this as a parent, but I'm really sick of reading out loud to my kid. I'm exhausted. And I actually wrote something for the New York Times Motherlode column that I had contributed to in the past. And I wrote this, and I listed the books that I wanted to hide so I would never have to read them again. And I had a lot of sympathetic parents weighing in. I had a lot of people kind of being like, how dare you not like reading to your children? And then the years went by and I kind of forgot about that. And I started finding new picture books. I started being recommended, whether it was the Hat books by Jonathan Klassen or Peter Brown books. I was like, wait, this is picture books now? I had no idea that this is where we were with picture books. And I loved them so much. And there was one particular book by Julie Fogliano, illustrated by Aaron Stead, called And Then It's Spring. When I read that book, I was blown away. And I was like, okay, I want to see if I can write like this. I wanted to stay in that way of writing forever. And so I started. That's when I started my picture book writing journey. And during that time, I was listening to podcasts about picture book writing and all of this. And I was on a run one day, and I heard a writer for School Library Journal, a blogger, Julie Danielson, talking to the podcaster saying, you know, there was this article in the New York Times, a blog column about this mother who was tired of reading picture books. And I stood stock still on the road, and I was like, oh my God, they're talking about me. She was very nice about it. She said, I think this mother is reading the wrong picture books. And she apparently had written an entire blog post about that column. And again, she was very kind, and she wasn't, slamming me or anything. She was just saying there are so many books out there that are beautiful and wonderful and that are being written today more than ever. And I hope this parent finds it. So I ended up emailing her this extremely long story about how years ago I'd written it. Years ago, she'd been on this podcast that I was just catching up on. And this is where I was. And this is the book I'm about to publish. And it was just this crazy, very surreal moment of realizing that, picture books today are so much better, in my opinion, than they have ever been. They're there's so many amazing writers, and there's so many amazing illustrators, and the boundaries they're breaking and the stories they're telling and what they're doing is, I can't get over it. I never want to get over it. I want to just keep reading them.
That's awesome. Well, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about you and find out more about Hello Star.
Well, I'm on Twitter. Which is at Grub Report, GRUBREPORT. My website is Stefanie Lucianovic. I won't spell it all out because I know you'll have it in the show notes. And that's where you can find out more about me. And I talk a lot about books and other things on Twitter. And you can get Hello Star now, pre-order it, your local independent bookstore. It's published October 5th is the pub date.
Awesome.
So it's coming soon.
Awesome. Well, we've had a great time speaking about a lot of different things. And we covered STEM and picture books and illustrations and science and empathy with our guest, the author of Hello Star, Stefanie Lucianovic. Hey, Stefanie, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. October is Bullying Prevention Month, and we are going to be taking a look back at some of the best Reading with Your Kids episodes that dealt with the issue of bullying. We're really excited. There's going to be a new weekly feature here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We know you're going to love it. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Stefanie Lucianovic. Be sure to check out Hello Star. Also want to thank my team, Alejandro Garrity, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank my amazing interns, Rory Grady, Michael Murphy, and we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.